Officer blocks, black woman, from Cockpit. She unlocks the door with her pilot code. A rush of hurried footsteps echoed through Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport, as though the entire building braced for something monumental. Among the sea of travelers was Captain Ebony Daniels, carrying her flight bag and wearing her crisp Delta Airlines uniform. She walked with the confidence of someone who had earned her stripes through sweat, determination, and countless hours in the cockpit. Little did she know that on this day, this seemingly routine flight, a single moment of prejudice and misplaced authority would test her resolve. The stage was set for a high-stakes confrontation that would ripple far beyond the airport gates. Ebony Daniels started her morning at 4:30 a.m., the shrill alarm piercing the quiet of her small condominium just outside Queens. Light from a dim lamp cast a glow over flight manuals and training binders that sat in neat piles on her desk. A graduate of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Ebony had always approached her career with meticulous precision. She believed that being fully prepared for anything mechanical malfunctions, medical emergencies, sudden weather shifts was just part of being a great pilot. There was a reason she had ascended the ranks in Delta Airlines so quickly. By 5:00 a.m., she was dressed in her neatly pressed pilot's uniform. Adorned with the 4 stripes on her epaulettes, Ebony admired herself briefly in the mirror. She had faced an uphill battle to get to this point, dealing with prejudices and old-school mentalities about who could or should occupy the cockpit. Despite the obstacles, she had persevered, refusing to let the cynicism of others cloud her vision of flight. Her mother used to say, "When your mind can soar, the sky has no limit." Ebony carried those words with her every single day. The morning commute to the airport was a blur of streetlights and half-empty roads. Her thoughts flickered back to her first flight lesson at age 16, a short discovery flight in a Cessna 172. The flight instructor, an older white gentleman, had been skeptical at first. After witnessing her natural aptitude for maneuvers, though, he was downright impressed. Now, nearly 15 years later, Ebony was fully certified to pilot an Airbus A320 and had logged thousands of flight hours. She wasn't just fulfilling her dream, she was living it. At 6:15 a.m., she made it to JFK's Terminal 4, breezing past security with a polite nod to the agents who recognized her from her frequent flights. Her flight plan for the day, JFK to Miami International Airport, a route she knew like the back of her hand. It promised to be a busy morning flight, with passengers ranging from vacationers to business professionals. Ebony mentally reviewed the route, weather reports, and air traffic conditions. Everything seemed standard, no alarms, no major storms brewing off the coast. Yet she had a small, nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach, as if the day held more tension than usual. After organizing her flight materials and finishing a quick briefing with her first officer, a friendly pilot named Mark Alvarez, Ebony headed down the corridor toward the cockpit. She passed gate agents, scanning boarding passes, flight attendants, politely directing passengers down the jet bridge, and travelers clutching to-go coffees. As she reached the cockpit door, something unexpected happened. A uniformed airport security officer blocked her path. Ebony initially thought he was merely controlling the flow of people. Sometimes random checks occurred. But the officer, a tall man with a square jaw and cold grey eyes, stood firm. He did not move aside as Ebony approached. She offered a polite smile. "Morning," she said. "I'm Captain Ebony Daniels. Is there an issue?" The officer looked at her skeptically, crossing his arms. His tone was clipped. "MAAM, you're not supposed to be here." Ebony's brows furrowed, a slight wave of confusion sweeping over her. "I'm the pilot for this flight," she explained, motioning to the 4 stripes on her shoulder. "Captain's uniform, see?" Sure, he replied, his voice dismissive. I've seen plenty of uniforms, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a pilot. I need some proof. She tried to keep her voice steady, ignoring the rush of annoyance that threatened to break through. I have my airline ID, she responded, reaching into her uniform jacket. The officer held up a hand, halting her motion. Ma'am, step aside, he ordered. You're telling me you're the pilot, but you look. His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Ebony's heart rate spiked. She had faced microaggressions before, but this was blatant. Commuters and staff watched with curiosity, some even with alarm. The last thing Ebony wanted was a scene, especially with passengers boarding in real time. I don't know what you're implying, Ebony said evenly, but this aircraft needs its captain, and that's me. Now, if you let me get my ID out. Before she could finish, the officer had repositioned himself, now fully blocking the cockpit door. Ebony could feel passengers' stares drilling into the back of her neck. There was no time to play games. The flight was scheduled to depart soon, and any delay would reflect poorly on her entire crew. She considered calling for another staff member or a supervisor, but something in the officer's eyes hinted that even official documentation might not sway him. He gestured to a junior flight attendant who was about to enter the cockpit. Who's the pilot for this flight? He demanded, pointing at Ebony. The attendant, flustered, nodded quickly. It's her, the flight attendant stammered. She's the captain. But the officer refused to budge. He stared Ebony down, as if waiting for any excuse to escalate the tension. Ebony inhaled deeply, reminding herself she was responsible not just for herself, but for every passenger waiting to depart. At that moment, a subtle hum began in her mind, the hum of righteous anger. She had earned her position. She had the authority. She had the code. Without waiting any longer, Ebony stepped forward, reached into her pocket, and punched in her secure pilot code on the keypad beside the cockpit door. The door made a soft beep, and then a click as it unlocked. The officer's eyes widened, shock contorting his features. He had clearly not anticipated that Ebony had the highest level of access on that aircraft. He took a step back, stunned momentarily into silence. Ebony quickly slipped inside, shutting the door behind her. She wanted to say something, pointed something that would highlight the absurdity and racism she had just encountered, but she also knew she had a flight to command. One glance at Mark Alvarez, her first officer, told her he had witnessed the tail end of the conflict. His expression was a mix of concern and anger. "Are you okay?" Mark asked softly as Ebony slid into her captain's seat. She nodded, exhaling slowly. "Let's just do our jobs," she said. "We have a plane to take to Miami." From behind the closed cockpit door, Ebony heard muffled voices. She half expected the officer to try and re-enter or cause a ruckus, but for the moment, it seemed he was dealing with the embarrassment of being wrong. Ebony strapped in and began her pre-flight checks alongside Mark. Checklists in hand, they carefully inspected every system. Her heart still thumped with adrenaline, but she channeled that energy into focusing on the tasks at hand. There was no room for error. A pilot's job was to be calm under pressure, no matter how unjust the pressure might be. As Ebony powered up the overhead panels, her hands moved methodically, flipping switches, verifying instruments. Mark read out the second set of checks, and Ebony responded with the standard calls. The mechanical whirs and beeps of the aircraft's avionics brought a sense of familiarity. This was her domain, the place she had fought so hard to reach. Nothing and no one would rob her of that earned position, not even an overzealous or prejudiced officer. Within minutes, Ebony and Mark had completed the entire pre-flight procedure, and the cabin crew reported that all passengers were seated and ready. The jet bridge pulled away. Ebony glanced out the window, scanning for ground control signals. It was time. Delta Flight 2679 to ground. Ebony said into her headset, "Request pushback clearance." Ground control responded quickly, granting permission. The aircraft began its backward roll, guided by the pushback tractor. As Ebony set the engines to idle, waiting for final clearance to taxi, she noticed airport security vehicles parked near the gates. That same officer stood among them, a look of frustration on his face. She forced herself to ignore him. He was no longer her problem. Her priority was the safety of the flight. Moments later, tower control cleared them for taxi, and Ebony guided the Airbus A320 along the maze of taxiways toward runway 22R. The morning sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the runway with a golden hue. Ebony performed the final takeoff checklist, flaps set, spoilers armed, cabin secured. Mark gave her a thumbs up. She advanced the throttles. In an exhilarating rush, the aircraft sped down the runway. Ebony's entire being honed in on the precise moment of rotation. She pulled back on the side stick, and they lifted smoothly into the sky. Almost instantly, the demands of controlling the aircraft replaced any lingering anger she felt. Flying was Ebony's solace, a place where everything else seemed to vanish except the immediate tasks and the bigger objective of reaching the destination safely. Yet, as they climbed to cruising altitude, Ebony couldn't help replaying the confrontation in her mind. She had encountered many forms of discrimination over the years, instructors who doubted her capabilities, examiners who seemed overly critical, and even some passengers who questioned whether she was truly the pilot when she greeted them at the cockpit door. But being physically blocked from her workplace was something new, and it left an unsettling residue. At 10,000 feet, Mark engaged the autopilot. The cabin crew began their first round of beverage service. Ebony took a moment to sip water and center herself. She reminded herself that karma had a way of unfolding. No one who acted with malice went unpunished forever. The question was when, where, and how. Ebony's mind drifted back to her childhood in Atlanta, where she used to lie on the hood of her father's old Buick, staring up at the planes, descending toward Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. She remembered how she would wave, imagining that one day she'd be waving to herself in the cockpit. Her family had always nurtured her aspirations, saving every extra dime to put her through flight camp. When she announced she wanted to attend Embry-Riddle, they celebrated, even though it meant tightening their belts for years. But not everyone in her life was as supportive. In her final year of high school, a counselor questioned whether Ebony had the right profile for a pilot. "You know, math and science can be very tough, Ebony," the counselor had said in a condescending tone. "You might want to consider a different path." Ebony overcame that by devoting extra hours in after-school programs to sharpen her math skills. She thrived at Embry-Riddle, graduating near the top of her class in aeronautical science. Throughout her time in flight school, Ebony noticed how often she was the only black woman in advanced courses. She endured stares, insensitive jokes, and even some blatant hostility. One instructor insisted on drilling her with questions about obscure emergency procedures in front of everyone, as if determined to expose her as incompetent. Instead, Ebony shone. She made it her mission to know every page of the flight manual by heart. By the time she passed her final check ride, that very instructor offered a grudging nod of respect. All these memories replayed in Ebony's mind as the A320 cruised over the East Coast. She found herself wondering how many more times she would have to prove herself. Her first officer, Mark, broke the silence. "You know," he said gently, "I saw what happened earlier. That was seriously messed up." Ebony looked over at him, scanning his face for any sign of pity. He was sincere, but Ebony didn't want sympathy, she wanted respect. "It is what it is," she replied. "Some people see the uniform on a black woman and can't handle it." Mark nodded solemnly. "If you want to report him, I'll back you up. I'm sure the airline will too." Ebony considered it. She wasn't one to shy away from accountability, but she also knew that formal processes often took time and emotional energy. Still, it weighed on her mind. "We'll see," she said. "For now, let's just get everyone to Miami safely." As the flight progressed, Ebony and Mark navigated mild turbulence. Clouds thickened, but Ebony's skillful control kept the ride comfortable for passengers. The seatbelt sign flicked on for about 15 minutes, then the air smoothed out again. With the autopilot re-engaged, Ebony glanced at her flight management system. All was going according to plan, arrival still slated for around 10:30 a.m. Then came the first sign of trouble. A cabin attendant signaled a medical emergency in row 28. An older gentleman was having chest pains. Ebony coordinated with the flight attendants to see if any passenger on board was a medical professional. Meanwhile, Mark began preparing for the possibility of an emergency landing if necessary. As pilot in command, Ebony had the ultimate call on whether to divert. They were currently near the coast of North Carolina, still over an hour away from Miami. The nearest major airport with suitable medical facilities was Charleston International. Ebony instructed Mark to contact air traffic control and declare a medical situation. On hearing Mark's urgent conversation, the flight attendants kicked into high gear, rummaging through the onboard medical kit, while a passenger who claimed to be an off-duty nurse offered assistance. For a moment, Ebony's confrontation with the security officer that morning became a distant memory. Her training and instincts consumed her. While Mark handled the radio communications, Ebony made the crucial decisions about flight routing. If they landed in Charleston, paramedics could meet them on the ground. With the gentleman's condition uncertain, Ebony decided to divert without hesitation. Delta 2679 cleared to divert to Charleston International. The air traffic controller's calm voice crackled through the headphones. "Expect vectors for runway 15. Ebony was all business now. "Let's do it," she said to Mark. They adjusted the flight plan, inputting the new coordinates into the flight management computer. The Airbus began its descent, engines roaring as they throttled back. In the cabin, tension rose. Flight attendants informed passengers of the emergency landing. Through the cockpit door, Ebony could hear muffled prayers, worried chatter, and the occasional cry. She kept her voice level as she addressed them on the PAR system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a passenger experiencing a serious medical situation, and we're diverting to Charleston for his safety. Our crew is doing everything possible. We'll be on the ground shortly. Please remain calm and follow the flight attendant's instructions." 15 minutes later, Ebony and Mark had the runway in sight. Ebony brought the plane in with a smooth but brisk approach, touching down firmly. As soon as the wheels kissed the tarmac, Ebony engaged the reverse thrusters. Ground personnel and an ambulance were already waiting on the tarmac. Once the A320 came to a halt at a designated stand, paramedics rushed in, whisking the ailing passenger away on a stretcher. During that tense half-hour on the ground, Ebony coordinated with the airline's operations department, ensuring they had the fuel to continue to Miami and verifying that the passengers' medical bills would be handled compassionately. The flight attendants handled concerned travelers, reassuring them that they would soon be airborne again. If there was one silver lining, it was that Ebony's quick thinking likely saved the passenger's life. Charleston's medical team later confirmed that he was in the early stages of a heart attack, and immediate care made a significant difference. Just as the situation seemed to be stabilizing, Ebony received unexpected news from ground control. There was a law enforcement presence requesting to speak with the captain. Ebony felt her pulse spike. Had the security officer from JFK lodged a complaint? It felt surreal that she was being intercepted in Charleston. Leaving Mark to handle further checklists, Ebony stepped off the plane. Two uniformed officers from Charleston Airport Police greeted her, their faces unreadable. Ebony's heart pounded. She straightened her shoulders, prepared for confrontation if necessary. "Captain Daniels?" one officer asked. "That's me. We've received a communication from JFK's Security Division," the officer continued. "Something about an incident involving you and one of their security officers. They gave us a heads up that you might be on this flight." Ebony inhaled a sharp breath. "Yes, there was an incident," she replied calmly. "But as far as I'm aware, it's resolved. I used my authorized code to enter my cockpit." The officer opened a small notepad. "According to them, you forced your way onto the aircraft and refused to comply with a security check." Ebony nearly laughed. "I didn't force anything. I am the captain of this flight." I showed my ID, and the officer still refused me entry. I had the flight to operate, so I used my pilot access code. "That's what the code is for." The second officer eyed Ebony, seemingly trying to gauge her sincerity. "We understand. And your airline ID checks out with Delta's flight roster, so everything appears in order from our side." It seems there's some confusion or escalation from that officer. Ebony exhaled in relief. "I appreciate you clarifying. There's no reason to delay this flight further. Passengers are anxious to reach Miami." The officers conferred quietly, then nodded. "We apologize for any inconvenience, Captain. You're free to continue. We'll make an official note that you complied fully. If JFK Security wants to pursue something further, that's their prerogative, but from our standpoint, you're clear." Ebony nodded in gratitude, though she felt a deep reservoir of anger simmering. The memory of that security officer's prejudice lingered in her mind like a toxic cloud. But she resolved to remain professional. She still had a flight to complete. Relieved of any further obligations, Ebony climbed back into the cockpit. Mark flashed her a questioning look, and she gave him a subtle head shake that said, "All good." She made a brief announcement to the passengers, apologizing for the delay and thanking them for their patience. Finally, they lifted off from Charleston. The short hop to Miami took just under an hour. By the time they landed, Ebony felt both mentally and physically drained. She parked the aircraft at the gate and waited while passengers disembarked. Many offered grateful smiles. One even thanked her for diverting to help save a life. For Ebony, that gratitude was the best part of the job, knowing her decisions had real, positive consequences for people's lives. Once the aircraft was empty, Ebony grabbed her flight bag, preparing to rest or check into her next scheduled flight. But a voice behind her made her pause. "Captain Daniels?" She turned to find a middle-aged black woman standing near the cockpit door. She wore a Delta customer service uniform and had tears in her eyes. "I just want to say thank you. I have a daughter who wants to be a pilot, and seeing you here means so much to me. I heard about what happened at JFK from a colleague, and I'm glad you stood your ground." Emotions surged inside Ebony. She managed a smile, gently clasping the woman's hands. "Never let your daughter give up," she said. "One day she'll be standing right here where I am." In the days that followed, Ebony expected some formal inquiry about the incident at JFK. Initially, nothing came. She carried on with her daily routine, flying routes from LaGuardia to O'Hare, from JFK to LAX. Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had witnessed the confrontation emailed Ebony's manager, praising Ebony's professionalism. Mark also submitted an internal report supporting Ebony's conduct. Then, about 2 weeks later, Ebony was called into a meeting with Delta's corporate security. The conversation was straightforward. They had received an official complaint from the security officer at JFK, who alleged that Ebony had violated security protocol and acted aggressively. Ebony presented her ID logs, flight credentials, testimonies from her colleagues, and, most importantly, the security footage which clearly showed the officer blocking her path. Reviewing this evidence, the corporate investigators found Ebony had acted within protocol. The officer's complaint was dismissed, and Ebony received a formal apology from the airline for any distress caused. Yet Ebony couldn't shake the feeling that some deeper measure of justice was needed. What if the officer did this to someone else in the future? As fate would have it, Ebony got another chance to witness karma in action. One evening, after completing a late flight from JFK to Denver, Ebony was approached by a senior Delta executive named Martin Reeves. He had an air of authority and empathy that Ebony appreciated. "I wanted to inform you privately," Martin began. "The officer who lodged the complaint at JFK Officer London is now under investigation for multiple instances of harassment and discrimination. Yours wasn't the only incident." Ebony's heart clenched. "That's terrible," she murmured, although relief washed over her that the man's behavior was finally being scrutinized. "I hope no one else had to go through what I did." Martin nodded. "It seems there were more severe cases. That officer apparently harassed airline employees, from baggage handlers to cabin crew. Some reported intimidation tactics. We're working with the Port Authority Police and TSA to handle this appropriately." Though Ebony disliked seeing anyone potentially lose their job, she believed strongly in accountability. Those who weaponized their authority to discriminate needed to face consequences. After all, airports were places of constant stress and vulnerability. No one should ever feel targeted simply because of their race, gender, or any other aspect of their identity. Weeks passed, and Ebony threw herself into her work, logging more hours and preparing for a captain upgrade course on a Boeing 767. But the memory of Officer London lingered in the back of her mind, popping up during idle moments. Sometimes she wondered if he felt any regret, or if he was merely angry he had been called out. Then, one chilly afternoon, Ebony found herself back at JFK for a flight to Seattle. She had just cleared the security checkpoint and was heading to her gate when she spotted a familiar figure being escorted by two uniformed officers. It was Officer London. His posture was slumped, his expression a mixture of shame and defiance. Ebony's heart gave a little jolt. Their eyes met. She could see recognition flash across his face. To her surprise, he offered a stiff nod, as if acknowledging her. Ebony paused for a moment, unsure what to do with the swirl of emotions inside. She wasn't about to gloat or provoke a scene. Instead, she simply nodded back, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The officers led him away, presumably to face disciplinary action or final dismissal. In that fleeting moment, Ebony sensed the gravity of karma. She thought about all the people the officer had mistreated. She thought about how a single act of bigotry could spiral into a career-ending fiasco. A pang of pity touched her heart, but it was overshadowed by relief. Sometimes the system did work. Sometimes the wheels of justice turned in the right direction. Soon after, Ebony was selected for additional training to transition onto the Boeing 767, a significant step up in her career. She flew down to Delta's training facility in Atlanta, ironically near the very airport where she had once gazed longingly at planes as a child. The days in the simulator were rigorous. Ebony practiced emergency drills, engine failures on takeoff, rapid decompression scenarios, all simulated, of course, but each one felt as intense as the real thing. Each pass or fail hinged on her calm decision-making, her ability to adapt quickly to mechanical or atmospheric changes. By now, Ebony had learned to channel her stress into focus. In a way, every challenge she had faced, from discriminatory encounters to life-or-death diversions, had sharpened her resilience. During one simulator session, Ebony had a flashback to the officer blocking her way, telling her she wasn't supposed to be there. And here she was, mastering a wide-body aircraft that flew international routes. She wondered if the officer would ever realize the magnitude of what he'd tried to hinder. She doubted it, but it no longer mattered. Her final simulator check ride ended with high praise from the instructor. "Captain Daniels, your readiness is commendable," he said, handing her a certificate. "I foresee a bright future for you in these bigger jets. Keep up the good work." Life moved on, but dramatic twists don't always respect a tidy schedule. While Ebony celebrated her transition to the Boeing 767, she received an unexpected message from HR. She was being asked to attend a hearing related to a lawsuit. Officer London had filed against the airport authority. He claimed wrongful termination and insisted Ebony's overreaction had ruined his career. On a Friday afternoon, Ebony found herself in a conference room with an airport authority attorney and a handful of legal staff. She had never wanted to be dragged into a lawsuit, but her testimony was crucial. The attorney, a poised woman named Natalie Chung, explained that Ebony's statement could help refute the officer's allegations that he had followed all correct protocols. "Just tell the truth," Natalie said. "We have security footage, but it helps to have your direct account." Ebony recounted every detail: how Officer London blocked her path, how he dismissed her official ID, how she used her pilot code. Throughout her narrative, Ebony felt tension in her chest. She wasn't out to get the man personally, but she refused to compromise her integrity. When she finished, Natalie looked confident. "Thank you, Captain Daniels. That's exactly what we needed. Our records show a pattern, and your statement confirms that his claims are baseless." Months dragged on, and Ebony heard little about the case. She continued to fly her new route on the Boeing 767, journeying to distant airports in Europe and South America. Then, one evening, she received a phone call from Natalie. The judge had dismissed Officer London's lawsuit for lack of merit. The airport authority and all parties involved were cleared of wrongdoing. Essentially, London's discriminatory behavior had been the root cause of his job loss, not Ebony's actions. A wave of relief coursed through Ebony. She had done nothing wrong, and now it was officially recognized. She didn't celebrate with loud fanfare. Instead, she took a quiet moment to reflect. The entire ordeal had been emotionally draining, but it also made her more determined than ever to be a beacon for young aspiring pilots, especially women of color who might face similar barriers. With the lawsuit behind her, Ebony poured her energy into mentorship programs. On her days off, she volunteered at local aviation clubs in the Atlanta area, offering guidance to teenagers who dreamed of flight. She gave talks at high schools, describing her experiences in the cockpit and the prejudice she had overcome. She reminded them that adversity could be a stepping stone rather than a roadblock. One Saturday, she hosted a workshop for young girls interested in STEM fields. Standing in front of a group of bright-eyed teenagers, Ebony recounted the day she was blocked from her own cockpit. Gasps and murmurs filled the room, disbelief that such a thing could happen. Ebony saw their outrage and, more importantly, their resolve. "How did you get through it?" asked one girl, her braids framing her curious eyes. Ebony smiled gently. "I remembered why I started this journey in the first place: to fly and to prove to myself, not to others, that I could. Knowing your purpose can guide you through the worst storms." The day began before sunrise, with Ebony double-checking her pre-flight paperwork for the overnight journey from Atlanta to Amsterdam. It was a route she enjoyed. Crossing the Atlantic always carried a sense of adventure, but she also knew that red-eye flights brought unique challenges. She scrolled through the meteorological reports one last time on her tablet. Scattered thunderstorms were forecast over the North Atlantic, but nothing seemed too severe at first glance. Still, Ebony had learned never to underestimate fast-developing weather systems. By the time she reached the Boeing 767-767's cockpit, the cabin crew was already busy welcoming passengers. Ebony greeted her first officer, Ramona Pierce, with a warm handshake. Ramona was relatively new to wide-body operations, but she'd proven herself exceptionally diligent in the simulator. "All set?" Ebony asked, setting her flight bag down and slipping into the left seat. Ramona nodded. "Looks like we'll have a relatively smooth crossing, except for some possible build-ups around 40 West," she remarked, tapping a spot on her own weather map. "We might need a small detour." Ebony smiled, appreciating Ramona's thoroughness. "We'll keep our eyes open. Let's finalize the fuel load to give ourselves a bit of extra buffer." In Ebony's mind, it was always better to carry a margin of safety when unpredictable storms lurked on the horizon. With the cabin doors closed and the pushback complete, they taxied out under the dim lights of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Ebony felt that familiar mixture of alertness and excitement. She guided the 767 smoothly off the runway, the massive jet roaring as it climbed into the sky. Once they reached their initial cruising altitude, she and Ramona ran through the after-takeoff checklist and settled into the rhythm of a long-haul flight. For the first few hours, everything went according to plan. The cabin lights dimmed for passengers, many of whom tried to sleep away the overnight stretch across the ocean. Ebony and Ramona exchanged small talk, discussing favorite layover cities and occasionally checking in with air traffic control to confirm their flight path. Then, around midnight local time, the weather reports started to change. A rapidly forming storm system was drifting east, directly into their projected flight path. Ramona's voice grew tense as she updated Ebony. "ATC is reporting cells developing faster than they anticipated. They're suggesting a heading adjustment of about 15 degrees to steer clear." Ebony scanned her instrument displays and the weather radar. A swath of ominous reds and yellows blipped on the screen, indicators of severe turbulence and thunderstorm activity. "That's quite a big cluster," she murmured, feeling a jolt of adrenaline. "Let's contact them for a diversion to the north. We don't want to dance with that storm if we don't have to." Together, they began the careful process of rerouting the 767 around the worst of the weather. Despite their efforts, they soon found themselves on the fringes of the storm system. Winds whipped around them and thunderheads loomed in the distance, crackling with lightning. The aircraft shuddered, turbulence thrashing it like a leaf caught in a gust. "Seatbelt sign on," Ebony ordered calmly. Over the PAR system, she made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're experiencing some unexpected rough air due to a developing storm. Please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened. We'll do our best to navigate around the worst of it." Behind the cockpit door, Ebony could sense the cabin crew hustling to secure carts and reassure passengers. She knew some travelers would be frightened, especially on an overnight flight when people were disoriented and tired. Her job, however, was to remain steady no matter what. She recalled times she'd been tested on the ground, like the day an officer blocked her from entering her own cockpit. Compared to that emotional turbulence, Ebony found renewed resolve to face anything thrown at her at 35,000 feet. The storm grew more intense, lightning flashing close enough to illuminate the cockpit in harsh white bursts. Ramona called out altitude changes and headings at a rapid pace, coordinating with ATC. The seatbelt sign stayed lit for more than an hour. Ebony felt the sweat on her brow as she fought the controls, manually adjusting the aircraft's pitch and power settings to maintain as much stability as possible. "Captain, we might need a bigger detour. The cells are moving faster than we are," Ramona warned, her eyes darting between the radar display and the window. Ebony nodded, her voice firm. "Let's do it. Safety first." She requested further clearance from ATC to deviate around the cell, and they complied. The 767 veered north once again, the engines roaring in protest against the wind shear. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the rattling began to ease. The lightning became less frequent, the wind shear abated. Ebony guided the aircraft back toward their oceanic track, heart-pounding but focused. When the radar finally showed a corridor of clear skies ahead, she let out a careful sigh of relief and engaged the autopilot once more. "Nice job," Ramona said softly, a hint of admiration in her voice. "I've never had to wrestle with turbulence that nasty before." Ebony gave a small, exhausted laugh. "Sometimes we have no choice but to wrestle. I'm just glad we got clear of it without any injuries or damage." She picked up the PAR microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've successfully navigated around the storm. We appreciate your patience. We'll keep the seatbelt sign on a bit longer, just until we're sure the air is stable, and then you can move about the cabin as needed." A wave of palpable relief rippled through the aircraft. Passengers who hadn't been able to sleep due to the turbulence slowly returned to calm. The flight attendants restarted beverage service, offering water and calming smiles to quell any lingering nerves. Hours later, as they began their approach into Amsterdam's Schiphol airport, the sun rose over the horizon, casting the cabin in a gentle glow. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, gazing at the serene dawn. It was hard to believe that only a few hours earlier they'd been engulfed by violent storms. Ebony touched down with a smooth landing, the wheels kissing the runway in a final, reassuring thump. Almost immediately, the cabin erupted in applause, a gesture that made Ebony flush with a mix of pride and embarrassment. She knew that the clapping wasn't just for a safe landing, it was for the unwavering composure she and Ramona had maintained during the ordeal. As Ebony taxied toward the gate, she caught Ramona's eye and grinned. Their shared experience in that storm had solidified their trust in each other. Outside, ground crew rushed forward to guide the 767 to its designated stand. The moment Ebony shut down the engines, she felt a wave of fatigue settle into her bones, yet she was brimming with satisfaction. This was what it meant to be a pilot, to face the unexpected, use every ounce of training and instinct, and deliver everyone safely to their destination. When the passengers finally disembarked, many paused to thank the cockpit crew personally. Ebony nodded with humility, simply relieved to have completed another test of her skills. She recalled the uncertain days of her early training, the discrimination she'd faced, and the feeling of triumph whenever she successfully tackled a challenging flight. Her path had never been easy, but standing there in the cockpit doorway, greeting each relieved passenger, Ebony was reminded that every hardship had prepared her for moments like this. Once again, adversity had proven no match for her resolve in the pilot's seat. And as she gathered her flight bag and made her way out of the aircraft, Ebony felt the comforting realization that she was exactly where she was meant to be, guiding people through turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, with a steady hand on the controls. Stepping off the jet bridge in Amsterdam, Ebony felt exhaustion and exhilaration all at once. She had a layover before the return flight. After clearing local procedures, Ebony relaxed at an airport cafe. As she sipped a warm cappuccino, a voice startled her. "Captain Daniels?" She looked up to see a middle-aged white man with a contrite expression. It took her a moment to place the face. It was one of the TSA supervisors from JFK, a person who had been present at an earlier meeting about her incident. Ebony's heart skipped. She set her cup down, bracing herself for whatever he wanted. "I just want to apologize for everything you went through," he said. "We should have intervened sooner. We had complaints against Officer London, but bureaucracy can be slow. I'm sorry." Ebony felt a swirl of emotions, relief, annoyance, maybe even a shred of acceptance. But she recognized the gesture's sincerity. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure what else to add. The man nodded, understanding that no further words could truly erase the stress of that day. Over the next several months, Ebony's career truly soared. Transitioning onto the Boeing 767 opened new doors, and she found herself regularly crossing oceans on international routes to Europe, South America, and even parts of Asia. Each flight brought its own challenges, intricate air traffic patterns over busy regions, ever-shifting weather systems, and the subtle differences in international airport procedures, but Ebony embraced them all. She felt a surge of pride each time she taxied a 767 onto the runway, fully aware of the magnitude of her responsibilities. On layovers, Ebony made an effort to explore new destinations, even if only for a few hours. In Madrid, she sampled local cuisine in quaint tapas bars, scribbling flight notes in a small journal between bites of jamon iberico. In Tokyo, she navigated neon-lit streets with fellow pilots, absorbing the city's pulsating energy. These moments abroad reminded her how far she had come from those youthful days, lying on the hood of her father's car in Atlanta, dreaming of adventure. Though the excitement of international flying filled her life with fresh purpose, Ebony never forgot the day she was forced to use her pilot access code at JFK. The memory flickered in her mind whenever she flashed her ID at a security checkpoint, whenever a curious child pointed at her uniform, or whenever a passenger on her flight expressed surprise that the captain was a black woman. These experiences, once painful, now served as stepping stones to show how much she had grown as a professional and as a human being. She also found renewed passion in mentorship. Since Ebony's promotion to wide-body captain, more junior pilots and flight attendants began to seek her out for guidance. Some of them had watched the airport's security footage or heard rumors of the confrontation with Officer London. Others only knew Ebony as the calm, poised captain who could handle even the most frantic emergencies. Regardless of how they'd discovered her story, these aspiring aviators wanted advice on navigating obstacles, both personal and professional. Ebony was more than willing to oblige. Her weekends off often included volunteer sessions at flight schools or seminars, where she'd speak about overcoming adversity in aviation. There, she shared both her triumphs and her failures, hammering home the message that no one's dream should be stifled by prejudice. She joined her airline's Diversity and Inclusion Committee and advocated for broader recruitment efforts in underrepresented communities. She believed that the cockpit should mirror the vast spectrum of people who loved flying. To her, representation wasn't just a buzzword, but a necessity for the future of aviation. Despite her growing status, skeptics still cropped up. Occasionally, a passenger would request to meet the pilot, only to greet Ebony with a startled blink or a forced smile. Some shrugged off their surprise gracefully, thanking her for a safe flight. Others stumbled through awkward comments about not expecting a female captain or how rare it is to see someone like her in command. Each time, Ebony responded with the same steady professionalism that had guided her all along, letting skill and results eclipse any preconceived notions. Meanwhile, news of Officer London's downfall circulated quietly among airport employees. Word traveled that he had moved out of state and found a mundane job outside of law enforcement. Whenever Ebony overheard hushed whispers about him, she felt an odd mixture of sadness and validation. While she had no desire to revel in his misfortune, she acknowledged that his behavior had real consequences not just for her, but for everyone he'd wronged. Perhaps the harsh lesson would push him to reflect on how he'd used his authority. On the rare nights she was home and off duty, Ebony allowed herself moments of reflection. She'd stare at her old embry-riddled textbooks, dog-eared from years of studying, or she'd scroll through photos of her earliest flights in a little Cessna 172. Each relic of her journey reminded her that she was now living the dream she had once only dared to imagine. When she recalled that humiliating day at JFK, she felt a lingering sting, but it also made her grateful. The adversity had sharpened her determination, reinforcing her belief that no one could bar her from a cockpit she had rightfully earned. In time, Ebony's resilience and record of flawless flights led to talk of even greater opportunities, perhaps an instructor role or a permanent seat on a flagship route that would take her to every corner of the globe. She was in no rush, though. Being in command of the Boeing 767 already felt like the culmination of her life's work. And yet, she knew there were always new horizons to conquer. As she tucked her logbook into her flight bag one evening, Ebony pondered what it really meant to complete the journey. She realized that her journey would never truly end. For every milestone crossed, there stood another runway, another flight plan, another door to open. And as she placed her captain's hat on the dresser, she smiled because she knew that each door would unlock a little more easily now, and that she would be ready, code in hand, to step through with unwavering confidence. Ebony stepped off the jet bridge at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, weary but content after a smooth overnight flight from Paris. Despite the fatigue that clung to her, she felt a familiar thrill just being back home in Atlanta. The terminal bustled with life, sleep-deprived travelers hauling suitcases, families rushing to reunions, and business people juggling last-minute phone calls. Ebony pulled her suitcase behind her, her captain's hat tucked neatly under her arm, longing for a warm shower and a quiet evening. As she made her way toward the exit, a figure by the floor-to-ceiling windows caught her attention. It was a teenage girl, around 14 or 15, leaning forward on the metal railing, mesmerized by the planes taxiing below. The girl's face lit up whenever a landing light flickered or a distant jet roared its engines. Something about her wide, hopeful eyes, or the way she seemed completely absorbed by the runway, struck a chord in Ebony. Recalling how she had once stared at airplanes from her father's old Buick in Atlanta, Ebony felt an immediate kinship. She paused, torn between her exhaustion and an instinctive desire to connect. With a gentle smile, she approached the girl. "Excuse me," Ebony said softly, "are you interested in flying?" The girl jumped slightly, then turned around, eyes widening at the sight of Ebony's uniform. "Yes, Mum," she replied, voice trembling with excitement. "I want to be a pilot someday." Ebony's heart swelled. She recognized the same flicker of passion she once carried in her own eyes. "What's your name?" "Jasmine," the girl replied, trying to rein in her enthusiasm as she glanced at Ebony's epaulettes. "Well, Jasmine," Ebony said, setting her flight bag down, "I'm Captain Ebony Daniels. I fly for Delta. Have you ever been in a cockpit before?" Jasmine shook her head. "I've never even been on a plane," she admitted, a touch of embarrassment creeping into her voice. "But I watch them every chance I get. My dad works here in the terminal, and sometimes he lets me come inside to see the planes." Ebony smiled encouragingly. She unbuttoned a small pouch on her jacket and pulled out a Delta wing pin. In the early days of her career, she'd received a similar pin from a mentor who told her, "Wear this when you're ready to fly." Since then, Ebony had made a tradition of giving these pins to aspiring pilots she met along the way. "Here," Ebony said, handing the pin to Jasmine. "Think of it as a reminder that the sky is yours to conquer. If I can make it from dreaming about planes in my backyard to sitting in the captain's seat, so can you." Jasmine's eyes glistened with awe. "Thank you," she whispered, cupping the pin in her hands. "Do you ever get scared about everything? There's so much to learn, and I don't even know where to start." Ebony felt a rush of empathy. She remembered her own worries struggling with advanced math, dealing with financial hurdles, and later, confronting prejudice from people like Officer London. "Fear is normal," Ebony said gently. All that matters is how you face it. Study hard, ask questions, and never let anyone convince you that you can't do it. When your mind can soar, the sky has no limit. My mum used to tell me that all the time. Jasmine smiled, her cheeks glowing with renewed hope. Ebony could practically see the gears turning in the young girl's mind, as if she were already imagining herself behind the controls of a big jet, guiding passengers to faraway destinations. Before they parted ways, Ebony scribbled the name of a local aviation youth program on a spare piece of paper. They host introductory flight lessons for kids. Go check it out, and if you ever need a reference or some advice, let them know I sent you. Jasmine's eyes danced with excitement as she clutched the paper and the wing pin. I will, she promised. Thank you, Captain Daniels. The first won't forget this. As Ebony watched Jasmine hurry off to find her dad, she felt her own fatigue lift just a little. The encounter reminded her that no matter how many storms or setbacks life threw her way, her journey was bigger than herself. She was part of a continuous loop. Someone had once inspired her, and now she had the privilege of inspiring others. Rolling her suitcase toward the arrivals area, Ebony reflected on how far she'd come since that day she was blocked from her own cockpit. Every challenge, from microaggressions during training to blatant bigotry on the job, had shaped her into a stronger, more compassionate leader. Watching Jasmine's determined expression, Ebony felt a surge of conviction that the battles she fought and the doors she unlocked were not just for her, they were for every dreamer looking up at the sky with wonder. As she stepped outside into the warm Atlanta sun, Ebony let the weight of her flight bag settle on her shoulder. The day was winding down, but a new chapter was just beginning for her, for Jasmine, and for every aspiring pilot who refused to let society define their altitude. A contented smile crossed Ebony's face. She knew, without a doubt, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, living her dream and lighting the way for those who would follow. Thank you for joining me on this powerful journey of determination, resilience, and triumph. Captain Ebony Daniels showed us what it means to stand firm against prejudice and to trust in your hard-earned right to soar. From that shocking moment of being blocked at the cockpit door to saving lives mid-flight and facing the consequences of discrimination head-on, her story reminds us that real courage glows brightest when faced with darkness. If this story moved you, please show your support by giving it a like, sharing it with friends who need some inspiration, and subscribing for more uplifting and dramatic stories. Your engagement helps spread stories of empowerment and keeps these vital narratives alive. Until next time, stay inspired, keep chasing your dreams, and always stand up for what's right, no matter who tries to bar your way to the skies.